Ladies and gentlemen, if there is one thing that should be exceedingly frustrating for all of us, it is when a miscarriage of justice occurs in this country, particularly in the wake of the rioters, the looters, the mob of charlatans who are causing rampant death and destruction in the wake of George Floyd's death in May of this year. And I want to turn to the specific case of a white bar owner in Omaha who was charged after shooting a man in self-defense, a man named Skurlock, after he had been beaten twice and had even fired warning shots. A man who was a veteran and facing horrific charges decided that it was no longer worth it, that he didn't have a chance at justice, and therefore he decided to take his own life. Of course, this is Jacob Gardner I'm speaking of. So, here's what's happened. According to Annie Gowen at the Washington Post, the death of a white bar owner accused of killing a Black Lives Matter protester in Omaha this spring has upended the controversial case and the local racial justice movement that it ignited, further rattling a community that has been grappling with its divisions. That's a load of crap. The only ones here who are fomenting divisions, or are speaking of divisions, are those who are attempting to destroy this country from within. But it goes on. Jacob Gardner, 38, was found dead outside a medical clinic near Portland, Oregon on Sunday, police said. He had left Omaha shortly after the local prosecutor ruled he wouldn't face charges in the death of James Skurlock, who was 22, and shot and killed after an argument outside Gardner's Omaha bar on May 30th. Now, remember, this is all taking place in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is all after the bars had been shut down, after there had been those draconian measures in response to an illness that is actually turning out to not be as deadly as it was originally claimed, but that's where we are right now. A grand jury, however, indicted Gardner on September 15th for charges of manslaughter, use of a firearm, and commission of a felony. What felony? This was in self-defense. The video made it clear that it was self-defense. So, again, I'm a bit, suspicious of a felony here. Attempted first-degree assault and making terroristic threats. Again, it is a clear-cut case of self-defense, and the local prosecutor said he wasn't even going to charge him because the evidence clearly spoke to that. By then, he had gone to Northern California. He was scared and fleeing from death threats. He was quoted as saying, "I'm more anxious now than when I was flying to Iraq," the former Marine told Omaha news station KETV shortly before the indictment was revealed. A police spokesman said they were still awaiting autopsy results Monday. Stuart J. Dorman, Gardner's attorney, said that Gardner killed himself. Black pastors and activists in Omaha said that while they were saddened by Gardner's death, it would not derail their quest for the city to address larger issues of systemic racism and police brutality. No, it is time for this nonsense to end. The only systemic racism I'm seeing portrayed here is from the Black Lives Matter group and Antifa. We can ill afford to allow our system of justice to be torn asunder just to placate those who have sainted people who have a criminal record and were engaged in criminal behavior. And by the way, George Floyd did not die from the knee on the back of his neck. Now, it can be argued that it was poor police practice, but again, I'm not so sure that I agree with that. He was hopped up and hyped up on so much fentanyl, cocaine, and other drugs that he was already dying. But let's see what they go on to say. I surely don't want anybody in my community to say that this has been brought to a conclusion. That was Peterson Love who said this, a longtime civil rights activist and Democrat who is running a write-in candidacy for the U.S. Senate against Republican Senator Ben Sasse. Well, that's cute. That's cute. Keep pandering. Keep playing politics with this. Keep tarnishing people's lives. And you think you're going to get any more popular? You think that the American people are going to trust you? Let me assure you, nothing could possibly be any further from the truth. He went on to say, this case evolved out of an environment we need to deal with. The environment that we need to deal with is the one that you charlatans have created. Those of you who stand idly by and allow people's private property rights to be violated daily. There is no excuse for what's going on, and the left is trying to make political hay out of it where none exists. That is the simple truth. He then said the fact that we're not going to have a trial does not change any of that. You know, the man killed himself because he did not believe he would receive a fair trial. That, you idiot, Mr. Love, is what systemic racism is. Your hatred for a particular group in the United States of America makes me sick. And you guys think you're going to get away with it. You think that this isn't going to come back and impact you. Well, let me assure you, it will. He goes on to say, speaking at a news conference Sunday, Gardner's attorney, Stuart J. Dornan, called the former Marine's death a terrible tragedy. Gardner served 2 tours in Iraq and had long suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, his attorney said, adding that he was set to fly back to the area to turn himself in to authorities Monday evening. This after the local prosecutor said he wasn't going to prosecute. Why did this happen? Because there was the mob that went and threatened more violence, threatened more looting, threatened more criminal behavior. We need to stop punishing people for exercising their right to self-defense. The man was savagely and brutally beaten, not once, but twice. And Scurlock was the 3rd individual who pummeled onto him and began railing on him, punching him, shoving his head against the ground, putting his life in danger. It is high past time that across the board, from coast to coast and border to border, we adopt castle doctrine and stand your ground in all states. Too many lives have been lost by those who have been coddling criminals. Look at the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Same thing. Self-defense is a right. And these people are just doing this because they think they can make political hay out of it in an election year. Shame on them. How disgusting. But it goes on. That night, in the old market, was a crossroads of where anger and fear met and unfortunately violence ensued, and 2 young men have lost their lives, Dornan said, referring to the neighborhood where the shooting took place. Reached by phone, Gardner's father, David, said, "I'm sorry, I just don't have anything to say." And, you know, the vultures in the press, those who have been pushing this false narrative, are equally as guilty as the corrupt politicians that have allowed this to occur. They are enabling these criminals and charlatans in their wanton act of destruction. Scurlock's death became a rallying cry. Justice for James. Justice for James, who was beating a bar owner in the act of being a hooligan, for want of a better term. I'm sorry, there is no sympathy for me here. I cannot give sympathy to those who are engaging in criminal activity, placing a man in fear for his life. It was not a disproportionate attack. He was being physically beaten. That puts him rightly in fear for his life. And in that instance, you are allowed to use up to and including deadly force to preserve your life. Self-defense is still recognized in the American jurisprudential system. This was at racial justice protests that they'd scream for justice for James, after the county attorney, Don Klein, ruled Gardner had acted in self-defense. What I just said. Then he, of course, later reversed course. I want Klein disbarred. He needs to surrender his law license post-haste forthwith. That is disgusting. Then, of course, WAPO has to sit there and just talk about all of the racial injustices that happened in the past. But I want to go to where it says here, last Tuesday, Frederick D. Franklin, a federal attorney with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Omaha, who acted as a special prosecutor, said at a news conference that investigators interviewed 60 witnesses, but Gardner's own words through text and Facebook messages became the probable cause for the indictment. Then let's see it. Don't just sit there and play coy. Your maneuverings led a man to take his own life, a man who served this country. The burden of proof is on their shoulders. Well, here's part of what WAPO is saying. The weekend after George Floyd's death, Gardner had written on Facebook that he planned to pull military-style fire watch the weekend at his bar, The Hive, the Omaha World Herald reported. Well, yes, there had been violent riots and looting that weekend, even here in Texas. So, that isn't a bad thing. He wanted to protect his property. Rooftop Koreans did it during the Rodney King outbreak and riots in Los Angeles. But Franklin goes on to say, I can tell you there is evidence that undermines Gardner's claim to self-defense. Then prove it. And that evidence comes primarily from Jake Gardner himself. Baloney. Absolute baloney. You too, sir, should be disbarred. State Senator Justin Wayne, another Democrat, serving as attorney for Scurlock's father, James, and other members, said Monday that the family was sad, disappointed, frustrated with the system, but would not be making any formal comment until a news conference planned for Tuesday. Well, screw you. Screw you and the hooligan that they raised. I have no patience for this. None. That Saturday night in May, Scurlock and some friends were marching through the popular Old Market area when they got into an argument with Gardner after one allegedly pushed his father. David Klein has said, when Scurlock and a friend moved close to Gardner, he backed up and lifted his t-shirt to reveal a gun in his waistband and told them to stay away, according to cell phone footage. So they were approaching him, they were intimidating him, and he had even stepped back. After a woman jumped on Gardner, he fired what Klein described as 2 warning shots that sent both the female protester and another protester running. Well, good. He didn't take a life then. Scurlock jumped on Gardner, placing him in what the bar owner later described to police as a chokehold. In other words, he physically battered him. That's a crime! With Scurlock on his back, Gardner fired over his shoulder and killed the 22-year-old. Well, duh! Wayne and Scurlock's family have disputed this version of events, saying that Scurlock jumped on Gardner because he believed he was confronting an active shooter. Oh, give me an ever-loving break. What a load of horse pocky. I don't accept it. I don't believe it. Klein initially said he would not bring charges against Gardner, but the veteran prosecutor later called for a grand jury to review the case. It was an unusual move, according to Renetta J. Mack, a law professor at Creighton University in Omaha. In order to give the community a sense of justice, I think the county attorney eventually agreed. Having a second set of eyes on it was the best course of action, Mack said. Well, no, clearly it wasn't. In the United States of America, we don't have community justice. We have individual justice. Otherwise, we create a miscarriage of justice, and that is exactly what has happened here. Of course, the grand jury clearly decided there was enough probable cause to proceed from Gardner's text and Facebook messages, she noted. But getting a conviction would have been tougher, with Franklin required to prove his case beyond a reasonable doubt. Again! This is politicizing our justice system, and it must stop. It must stop. Many protesters had been surprised by the grand jury indictment and had been readying to take to the streets if the decision had not gone their way. So, there you go. Pressure from the mobs. That is what this is. And that was said by Cole Christensen, who's 28, an activist with the local social justice group Pro-Black, spelled P-R-O-B-L-A-C. Give me an ever-loving break. They are the domestic terrorists, and it is time that they be labeled as such and treated as such. Initially, his reaction was sadness that they had to work so hard to get a grand jury review and worry that people would move on and the movement would lose momentum, he said. You see, they don't care. They don't care about the loss of a man who served this country. That's because they don't love this country. They hate this country. They've said so themselves in chants on the street where they went out and said, "Death to America." He says it was a weird, bittersweet moment. Is this man demented or what? This man is demented. Now, the group that gathers in Memorial Park each Sunday to plan their next steps is just in total disbelief. Total disbelief. That's how this story ends. There should be no total disbelief here. What should be here is an acknowledgement of the fact that we have allowed criminals to go free and we have arrested people for defending themselves. America, we need to wake up and start defending our fundamental and inalienable rights.